Okay, hey, we're back here in ancient China, and I'm going to read another story from the Qilin Purse. This is the second story. It is called Dog Steals and Rooster Crows. All right, well, let's see what that is all about. We know that roosters crow, but what about this dog stealing business? Well, let's find out what it's all about. Okay, here it goes. Dog steals and rooster crows. This story takes place more than 2,000 years ago during the period of the Warring States. Although in appearance China was still ruled by the sovereigns of the Zhou dynasty, many parts of the country had become states with their own kings. In the state of Qi, there lived a lord by the name of Meng Chang. He was the prime minister to the king of Qi. He was also a very generous man. He used to invite a great number of people to live in his house, giving them food, clothes, and money to spend. These menko, or house guests, were mostly scholars, artists, and craftsmen who would work for him in return. There was a time when he accommodated nearly 3,000 guests in his house. It's a big house. One evening, while Lord Meng Chang and his guests were having dinner, a servant brought two men into the hall. One was short, skinny, and dressed in black. The other was tall, robust, and dressed in red. They bowed deeply before Lord Meng Chang and said that they wanted to serve him. Very well, said Lord Meng Chang. First, he turned to the man dressed in black. Tell me, my friend, what skills do you have? How do you earn a living? The man hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, My lord, I bark for a living. The guests looked at one another with puzzled expressions. Lord Meng Chang thought that he had misheard, so he asked, I am sorry, do you mean to say that you bark like a dog for a living? That is exactly what I mean, the man replied. I just bark like a real dog. Bow wow! At this, his house guests burst into laughter, but Lord Meng Chang did not laugh. Instead, he asked kindly, My friend, tell me, how is it you bark for a living? I used to be a thief, said the man. When I found a house I wanted to break into, I would go there at night wearing a dog skin. If I was discovered, I would bark like a dog and be able to get away. That's how I used to make a living. He paused and his face grew red. Now I know it's wrong to steal, and I promise you that I am a thief no longer. Good, said the Lord. And then he turned to the tall man dressed in red. My friend, what about you? How do you earn a living? The man smiled mischievously and said, My lord, I crow. Again, the puzzled house guests looked at one another. That is interesting, said the Lord. Tell us more. Every morning I used to wake up early, said the man, and go into the courtyard and crow like a rooster. Cock-a-doodle-doo! There were always roosters in the village, and when they heard me crow, they would do the same. Cock-a-doodle-doo! We would all crow together, thinking that it was already dawn, the people would get up. They were pleased that they had risen early, so they would pay me. That's how I used to make a living. The house guests roared with laughter, but Lord Meng Chang only smiled. Very well, my new friends, he said. Welcome to my house. Sit down and dine with us. The house guests were shocked. They could not believe that Lord Meng Chang would take two vagabonds into his house and treat them as guests. To show their disapproval, the house guests nicknamed the two men Dog Steals and Rooster Crows. A few months later, Lord Meng Chang received a letter from the king of the state of Chen. The king invited Lord Meng Chang to come to his country and be his prime minister. Now, Lord Meng Chang knew that the king of Qin was a very ambitious man who acted on impulse. He didn't want to go. So he asked his king for advice. The king of Qi said, I would be sorry to lose you as my prime minister, but if you do not accept the offer, the king of Qin might consider this an insult and use it as an excuse to declare war against us. I think you should go. So Lord Meng Chang gathered a few of his guests, including Dog Steels and Rooster Crows, and went to the state of Qin. They brought with them many gifts, including a very precious white mink cloak for the king. At first, the king of Qin was delighted to see Lord Meng Chang and the gifts that he had brought. And after the Lord had rested for a few days, the king was ready to appoint him prime minister. But one of the king's officials, who was afraid that Lord Meng Chang might become a court favorite, said to him, here comes the jealousies, I don't believe that the Lord Meng Chang left his king willingly to serve Ta Wang. Ta Wang is a word that your honor or your highest or, my king type of thing. I am sure he came here as a spy. The king instantly became suspicious and ordered his guards to throw Lord Meng Chang into jail. So he came there, left his own country to come to be a prime minister at this other country, and then he gets thrown in jail because somebody said, I think he's here to steal things and be bad. All right. And to be a spy type of thing. That night, the house guests who had accompanied Lord Meng Chang gathered in a tavern and tried to think of a way to save him. There was one man in the group who was considered the wisest. He said, the king of Qin is very fond of his youngest wife. If she puts in a word for our Lord, maybe the king will let him go. But how can we persuade her to do so? Asked another guest. I wish we had not given the king of Qin the white mink cloak. It would have been a wonderful gift for his young wife. But now it must be locked up in the treasure house. There is no way we can get it back. While they were talking, Dog Steels quietly left the tavern. He found his way to the palace treasure house and took out a dog skin from his bosom. He pulled the skin over himself and leaped over the wall. Bow wow, he barked. Two huge dogs appeared and sprang at him. Bow wow, bow wow. The three started a fight. The treasure house guard, who had been sleeping, came out. When he saw his dogs with Dog Steels, he thought they were fighting with just another dog. So he took them into the house and tied them up and went back to bed. After things had quieted down, Dog Steels crept over to the treasure house and opened the door with a tool he had brought with him. There, on the top shelf of the closet, he saw the white mink cloak among the many gifts they had brought for the king and his wives. He grabbed the cloak and ran back to the tavern. Dog Steels gave the white mink cloak to one of the house guests, who immediately went to the palace and presented it to the king's youngest wife. She was so pleased with the gift that she agreed to talk to the king about releasing Lord Meng Chang. That night, when the king went to see her, she stopped him at the door of her chamber. Before you come in, Ta Wang, she said, I want you to grant me a wish. Oh, my heart and liver, cried the king, using a Chinese expression for sweetheart. Haven't I given you everything you ever wanted? What is it that you want now? If you don't need Lord Meng Chang to be your prime minister, why not let him go home? Asked the young wife. The king was so eager to please her that he ordered his guards to set Lord Meng Chang free at once. Lord Meng Chang quickly gathered his guests at the tavern. Let us leave before the king changes his mind. But our group is large, and if we leave together, it might arouse suspicion. So two of the house guests offered to stay behind and wait for a while. We will join you at the border later, they said to Lord Meng Chang. The Lord rose and headed with the rest of his group toward the border. It was nearly midnight by the time the Lord and his house guests got there. A pale moon hung high up in the sky. Everything was quiet and the gates were locked. The sentinels, which are like guards, or sentries as we called them in the last book, who patrolled the border wall had apparently gone to bed. "We are trapped," cried the Lord. "Nobody's allowed to go across the border at night. But we can't stay here. The king might send his guards to arrest me again." Suddenly, they heard clop, 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 and saw a man on a horse galloping toward them. It was one of the two house guests that had stayed behind. "My lord," said the man as he sprang from his horse, "after you left, an official from the palace came looking for you. He said that you had been summoned by the king. He was angry to hear that you had left and said you should not have done so without the king's permission. He went back to report to the king. I think we should cross the border before anything happens." "What can we do?" cried the Lord. "The gates won't be open until morning." "Let's wake up the soldiers and ask them to open the gates," suggested one guest. "No," said the Lord. They will arrest anybody who tries to break the rules and cross the border at night." Again, they heard clop, clop, clop. The other man they had left behind was galloping toward them. "My lord," he cried as he leapt from his horse, "the king's soldiers are only 5 li away. We must cross the border at once." "But the gates won't be opened until morning," cried the Lord desperately. At that moment, Rooster Crow spoke up. "Everyone get on your horses and be ready to cross the border. The gates will be opened at once." The next moment, he had climbed up a tree and was crowing with all his might. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Cock-a-doodle-doo!" "What are you doing up there?" cried the Lord. "You'll get us into even more trouble. Come down at once." But Rooster Crows kept crowing. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" All of a sudden, they heard an answering cock-a-doodle-doo. A rooster in a nearby village was crowing, and soon all the other roosters had joined in. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Cock-a-doodle-doo! Whatever." The sentinels who were asleep in the fortress were awakened by the crowing. Thinking it was already morning, they jumped out of bed and ran to unlock the gates. Lord Meng Chang and his guest galloped through the gates and reached the other side of the border safely. Early that same morning, when the king of Qin woke up, his young wife took out the white mink cloak and showed it to him. "How did you get it?" he asked the astonished king. He knew immediately that it was the same cloak Lord Meng Chang had given him. "I don't know," said his young wife. "One of the Lord Meng Chang's house guests gave it to me as a gift." Before the king could say anything, a soldier came to report that Lord Meng Chang and his house guests had already crossed the border. The king sighed. "The king of Qi is very lucky to have such a wise man as Lord Meng Chang, who knows how to rally talented people around him. If I invade Qi, I may not win." He gave orders for his soldiers to withdraw from the border. Back home, Lord Meng Chang rewarded Dog Steels and Rooster Crows generously. He said that everyone has a talent that will prove useful one time or another. So we have the moral of the story, the lesson. Yesterday's lesson was if you have a chance to do something good for somebody, you do it because it will come back to you in your life, those good deeds. And this one says that no matter what your talent is, everyone has some sort of talent that will prove to be useful at some time or another. In this case, Dog Steels and Rooster Crows, they were laughed at when people first found out what they used to do for a living. But in this case, in this story, it proved useful. Dog Steels went in and became a dog and fought with the dogs. They got put away, and he stole the white fur coat, gave it to the young wife, and she talked her husband into letting them go. So he let him go, then kind of changed his mind when they were at the border. They couldn't get through the border gates. until rooster crows came along and did the crowing. The gate guards thought it was morning because it caused other roosters to crow and opened the gates, let them through. So everybody has some kind of talent that will prove useful at some point in their lives. And with that, I leave you and say, have a great day until tomorrow.